My daughter expected $5 from my will. Instead, she got the exact dollar value of how little she truly cared about me. When my daughter Emma walked into that mahogany-paneled law office last Tuesday morning, she was already spending the $5 million in her head. Designer handbags, European vacations, maybe that Tesla she'd been eyeing for months. She'd even started dropping hints about quitting her marketing job because, well, why work when you're about to inherit a fortune? But when lawyer Marcus Webb smiled and opened that cream-colored envelope containing my will, everything Emma thought she knew about her future crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane. What happened next would change our family forever, and honestly, it was exactly what she deserved. Before we dive into this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to want to follow along because what I'm about to reveal will shock you just as much as it shocked Emma. Now, to understand how we got to that devastating moment in the lawyer's office, I need to take you back 18 months to where this whole mess began. My name is Richard Carver, and at 74 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The first red flag appeared on a seemingly ordinary Thursday evening in March. I'd been battling a nasty bout of pneumonia, and my doctor had finally cleared me to receive visitors again after 2 weeks of isolation. Emma had been texting me daily, which I found touching at first. Sweet messages like, "How are you feeling, Dad?" and "Can't wait to see you when you're better." But something felt different about her concern. Too intense, too focused on my health in a way that made my skin crawl. When she finally visited, she didn't come alone. Her husband Derek tagged along, which should have been my second warning sign. Derek had never shown much interest in spending time with me. The man could barely manage a handshake at family gatherings, let alone volunteer for a sick visit. But there they were, sitting in my living room, Derek fidgeting with his phone, while Emma perched on the edge of my old recliner like a vulture waiting for dinner. "Dad, you gave us quite a scare," Emma said, reaching over to pat my hand. Her touch felt calculating somehow, like she was checking my pulse rather than offering comfort. When Dr. Patterson called and said you were in the hospital, Derek and I just thought, well, we thought about how unprepared we'd be if something happened to you. Derek looked up from his phone then, nodding with fake solemnity. "That's right, Mr. Carver. Emma's been losing sleep thinking about all the things we don't know about your affairs, your will, your finances, that sort of thing. I remember feeling a chill that had nothing to do with my recovering lungs. These two weren't here to check on my health, they were here to check on their inheritance. My own daughter was performing reconnaissance on her dying father's bank account. Well, I said carefully, I appreciate your concern, but I'm feeling much better now. The doctors say I should make a full recovery." Emma's smile faltered for just a microsecond, but I caught it. That tiny flash of disappointment when she realized I wasn't circling the drain after all. She recovered quickly, of course, painting that fake smile back on her face like a mask. "Oh, we're so relieved, Dad. So relieved. But you know, this whole experience got us thinking about the future, about making sure everything is in order, just in case." Just in case, such delicate words for such vulgar thoughts. Derek leaned forward, suddenly animated. "The thing is, Mr. Carver, Emma mentioned you'd done well with your investments over the years, real estate, stocks, that consulting business you built from nothing. We figure you must be sitting pretty comfortable." I studied Derek's face as he spoke. This was a man who'd married my daughter 6 years ago, who'd attended exactly 4 family dinners in all that time, who'd never once asked about my business or shown interest in my life story. Now, suddenly, he was fascinated by my portfolio? "I've been blessed," I said simply. "Worked hard, saved smart, invested wisely, nothing too exciting." Emma practically vibrated with anticipation. "But Dad, we should probably know the basics, right? I mean, I'm your only child. I should understand what you've built so I can, honor your legacy properly." Honor my legacy. The audacity was breathtaking. This woman who called me twice a year, who'd missed the last 3 Christmases because Derek's family was more important, who'd borrowed $15,000 for their wedding and never paid back a cent, now wanted to honor my legacy. I decided to test them. Well, if you're really curious, I suppose I could share some details. The real estate portfolio alone is worth about $2.8 million. Then there's the investment accounts, the business sale proceeds, some collectibles, and art pieces your mother and I accumulated over the years. Derek's eyes went wide. I could practically see the calculator spinning in his brain. Emma gripped the arm of her chair so tight her knuckles went white. $2.8 million just in real estate? Emma's voice came out as a whisper. Dad, I had no idea you were so successful. Your mother and I lived modestly, I explained, watching their faces carefully. We never flaunted our wealth, preferred to save and invest rather than spend on luxury. The total estate is probably worth around $5 million, give or take. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Derek's breathing change, could see Emma's mind racing behind her eyes. $5 million, more money than either of them had ever imagined having access to. That's incredible, Dad, Emma finally managed. You and Mom built something really special. But I noticed she said you and Mom past tense, like I was already dead and buried, like they were already inheriting. The visit lasted another 40 minutes, but the tone had completely shifted. Every question became about my assets. Did I have life insurance? What about the cabin in Colorado? Were my affairs in order with a lawyer? They peppered me with inquiries disguised as concern, probing for information like prospectors hunting for gold. When they finally left, Emma hugged me goodbye with more enthusiasm than she'd shown in years. We love you so much, Dad. Take care of yourself, okay? We need you around for a long, long time. Lies, all of it lies. I stood at my living room window watching them drive away, Derek gesturing wildly as he spoke to Emma in the car. Even from a distance, I could tell they were already making plans for my money that I'd earned through 43 years of 18-hour days, strategic risks, and careful planning. Money I'd saved by driving used cars and shopping at discount stores while building my business empire. Money they thought they deserved simply because Emma shared my DNA. That night, I called my lawyer Marcus Webb and scheduled an appointment for the following week, not to update my will, but to completely rewrite it. Because if Emma and Derek wanted to play games with my legacy, I was about to show them what a real player looked like. The meeting with Marcus went exactly as I'd hoped. He listened without judgment as I explained the situation, nodding thoughtfully when I described Emma's sudden interest in my health and finances. This is more common than you might think, Richard, Marcus said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Family members sometimes show their true colors when significant wealth is involved. The question is, what do you want to do about it? What I wanted to do was teach my daughter a lesson she'd never forget. A lesson about respect, about family loyalty, about the difference between earning something and simply expecting it to be handed to you. I want to set up a trust, I told Marcus, something that looks generous on the surface but comes with conditions, serious conditions. Marcus smiled then, the kind of smile that suggested he'd helped other disappointed parents navigate similar betrayals. What kind of conditions are we talking about? I spent the next hour outlining my plan. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Emma would inherit exactly what she deserved, which was a wake-up call about the difference between entitlement and gratitude. But the real genius of my plan wouldn't become clear until that meeting in Marcus's office 18 months later, when Emma sat across from his desk expecting to claim her windfall and instead discovered the price of her greed. Over the following weeks, Emma's behavior became even more transparent. She started visiting regularly, always with Derek in tow, always asking subtle questions about my estate planning. They'd bring groceries I didn't need, offer to help with yard work I could handle myself, volunteer to drive me to doctor appointments I was perfectly capable of attending alone. It was pathetic, really. This elaborate performance of caring designed to keep them in my good graces until I died and left them rich. What made it worse was how obvious they thought they were being. Like I was some senile old fool who couldn't see through their act. The breaking point came during what would be our final family dinner together. Emma had insisted on cooking, which should have been my first clue since she'd never cooked for me before in her adult life. She made pot roast my favorite and kept refilling my wine glass while Derek asked increasingly direct questions about my investment strategy. You know, Mr. Carver, Derek said, cutting into his meat with surgical precision, Emma and I have been talking about the future, about what happens when you're not around to manage all these assets you've built up. Emma shot him a warning look, but Derek pressed on, emboldened by wine and greed. The thing is, we want to make sure we're prepared to honor your wishes, to manage your legacy responsibly. but we'd need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. I set down my fork and looked at both of them, really looked at them. Emma with her designer clothes purchased on credit card debt, Derek with his expensive watch that he'd probably financed. Two people living beyond their means, drowning in their own poor choices, eyeing my life's work like hungry wolves. You want to know about my legacy? I asked quietly. They both nodded eagerly. My legacy isn't money, Emma. My legacy is the values your mother and I tried to teach you. Hard work, integrity, treating family with love and respect, not as a source of income. Emma's face flushed red. Dad, that's not fair. We care about you, not your money. Really? Then why is this the most time you've spent with me in 6 years? Why are you suddenly so interested in my health, my legal affairs, my financial situation? Derek opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You want to talk about legacy? Let me tell you what I'm really leaving behind. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Emma's fork hovered halfway to her mouth, a piece of pot roast dangling from the tines like her hopes for easy money. Derek had gone completely still, his expensive watch catching the light from my dining room chandelier as his hand froze around his wine glass. You see, I continued, my voice steady as granite, I've been watching you both very carefully these past few months. Every visit, every phone call, every concerned question about my health. And you know what I've learned? I've learned that my own daughter views me as nothing more than a retirement plan. Emma finally found her voice, though it came out strangled and defensive. That's not true, Dad. We love you. We've always been here for you. The lie was so audacious I almost laughed. Always been here for me? Emma, you missed Christmas 3 years running because Derek's family was more convenient. You borrowed $15,000 for your wedding and never paid back a dime. The only time you call is when you need something, and the only reason you're calling now is because you think I'm going to die soon and leave you rich. Derek's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. Now wait just a minute, Mr. Carver. That's completely unfair. We've been nothing but supportive during your illness. Supportive? I stood up from my chair, my 74-year-old frame straightening with purpose. You've been calculating. There's a difference between supporting someone and evaluating their net worth for your own benefit. Emma started crying then, those crocodile tears that had worked on me when she was 7 years old but held no power over me now. Dad, please, you're misunderstanding everything. Yes, we talked about finances, but only because we want to be prepared. We want to handle things properly when the time comes. When the time comes, I repeated. Such a delicate way of saying when I'm dead and you can finally cash in. I walked to my living room window, the same window where I'd watched them drive away after that first reconnaissance visit. The maple tree in my front yard was turning brilliant red with autumn colors, just like Emma's face was turning red with embarrassment and anger. Let me tell you what's really going to happen, I said, not turning around to face them. I've already updated my will. Everything is arranged exactly as it should be. I heard Emma's sharp intake of breath, the scrape of Derek's chair as he leaned forward, hook, line, and sinker. The reading will happen at Marcus Webb's office downtown. You remember Marcus, don't you, Emma? He handled your mother's estate after she passed. Lovely man, very thorough. Dad, Emma's voice was barely a whisper now, what exactly did you put in the will? I turned around slowly, taking in their pale faces, their anxious expressions, their barely concealed desperation. This was the moment I'd been building toward for months, the moment when I'd finally teach my daughter what real consequences looked like. You'll find out when I'm gone, I said simply. But I will tell you this much, everyone gets exactly what they deserve. Derek practically lunged out of his chair. What does that mean? What kind of answer is that? It means, I said, walking back to the dinner table where Emma's untouched pot roast was growing cold, that I've spent considerable time thinking about what kind of daughter you've been to me, Emma, and what kind of son-in-law you've been, Derek. And my will reflects those thoughts very accurately. Emma was full-on sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. Daddy, please. I know we haven't been perfect, but we're family. We love you. Doesn't that count for something? The word daddy hit me right in the chest. She hadn't called me that since she was 12 years old. Now, faced with the possibility that her inheritance might not be guaranteed, suddenly I was daddy again. Fiti, family, I repeated, tasting the word like it was bitter medicine. You know what family means to me, Emma? Family means showing up when someone needs you, not when you need something from them. Family means caring about someone's well-being without calculating what's in it for you. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip, letting them stew in their anxiety for a moment. Your mother understood family. She visited her parents every Sunday until the day they died, not because she expected an inheritance, but because she loved them. She helped her sister through cancer treatments, drove her to chemotherapy appointments, held her hair while she threw up from the medicine, never asked for anything in return. Derek had the audacity to look impatient. Mr. Carver, with all due respect, we're not talking about charity work here. We're talking about natural inheritance patterns. Emma is your only child. It's normal for parents to leave their assets to their children. Normal, I said, setting down my glass with deliberate precision. You know what else is normal, Derek? Children caring about their parents while they're alive, not just when they're about to die. Children visiting because they enjoy the company, not because they're performing due diligence on their future windfall. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup even further. We do care about you, Dad. Maybe we haven't shown it perfectly, but we're here now. We're trying. You're here now because you think I'm worth $5 million, I said bluntly. If I were broke and living in a one-bedroom apartment, would you still be bringing me pot roast and asking about my health every week? The silence that followed gave me my answer. I walked to my front door and opened it wide, cool autumn air rushing into my dining room. I think this conversation is over. Derek jumped up immediately, clearly relieved to escape the uncomfortable confrontation. But Emma remained seated, staring at me with a mixture of desperation and dawning realization. Dear Dad, please don't do this. Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, please just talk to us. We can work this out. Can we? I asked. Can we really? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a daughter who only remembers she has a father when she thinks he might be dying. This looks like two people who've spent the last 6 months treating me like a business opportunity instead of a human being. Emma finally stood up, her legs shaky beneath her. What do you want from us? What can we do to fix this? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. What did I want from them? An apology? A promise to change? Some guarantee that they'd suddenly become the loving, respectful family members they should have been all along? I want you to leave, I said quietly. I want you to go home and think about the kind of people you've become. And then I want you to decide if that's really who you want to be. They gathered their coats in silence, Emma still sniffling, Derek avoiding eye contact. As they reached the doorway, Emma turned back one last time. Dad, I love you. I know you don't believe that right now, but I do love you. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised from birth, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged and whose college tuition I'd paid. This person who'd grown into someone I barely recognized. Emma, I said softly, love isn't something you say, it's something you do. And your actions have been speaking louder than your words for a very long time. After they left, I sat alone in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what would be our last family meal. 3 plates of cold pot roast, 3 glasses of wine barely touched, and the lingering scent of Emma's expensive perfume that she probably couldn't afford. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Marcus Webb's number. The plan we'd crafted was already in motion, but after tonight's performance, I wanted to make one small addition. Something that would really drive the point home when Emma sat in that law office expecting her windfall. Marcus, I said when he answered. It's Richard Carver. I need to schedule another appointment. There's one more element I want to add to the will. Of course, Richard. What did you have in mind? I smiled as I explained my final addition, the piece de resistance that would make Emma's eventual disappointment absolutely perfect. Marcus chuckled as he took notes. That's brilliant, Richard. Absolutely brilliant. She'll never see it coming. And she wouldn't. None of them would. The next few months passed in blissful silence. No more surprise visits from Emma and Derek. No more concerned phone calls asking about my health. No more transparent attempts to inventory my assets under the guise of family bonding. It was as if they'd finally understood that their performance had been exposed, and they'd retreated to lick their wounds and recalculate their strategy. But I knew better. I knew they were simply biding their time, waiting for news of my demise so they could rush to Marcus Webb's office and claim their prize. The thought of their anticipation, their quiet confidence that $5 million was heading their way, filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. During those quiet months, I made some changes to my life. Real changes, not the superficial adjustments Emma and Derek had hoped to influence. I started volunteering at the local literacy center, helping adults learn to read. I donated anonymously to 3 different charities that supported causes your mother had cared about. I even took that trip to Ireland I'd been postponing for 15 years, walking the cliffs of Moher and drinking Guinness in pubs older than my great-grandfather. For the first time since your mother died, I felt truly alive again, free from the burden of disappointing family members who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with a heartbeat. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emma's greed had inadvertently given me the greatest gift imaginable: clarity about who deserved my time, energy, and yes, my money. I also spent considerable time with Marcus Webb, fine-tuning every detail of what would become Emma's education and consequences. We crafted language that was legally bulletproof, but emotionally devastating. We structured trusts and conditions that would reveal themselves like layers of an onion, each one more surprising than the last. "You know, Richard," Marcus said during one of our planning sessions, "in 30 years of estate law, I've seen a lot of family drama, but this is poetry. Your daughter is going to learn things about herself she never knew were true." The beauty of our plan lay in its elegant simplicity. Emma expected $5 million with no strings attached. What she would actually receive was something far more valuable: a mirror reflecting exactly who she'd become as a person. Whether she chose to look into that mirror or smash it to pieces would be entirely up to her. Winter came and went without a word from Emma or Derek. Spring arrived with its usual promise of renewal, and I found myself healthier and happier than I'd been in years. My doctor was amazed at my improved blood pressure and energy levels. Turns out, cutting toxic people out of your life has remarkable health benefits, even when those toxic people happen to be your own children. I celebrated my 75th birthday alone, which sounds sad, but was actually perfect. I cooked myself a steak dinner, opened a bottle of wine your mother and I had been saving for a special occasion, and toasted to the man I'd become after finally learning to value myself as much as I'd valued my ungrateful family. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late May. I was watering the tomato plants in my garden when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer it. "Mr. Carver? This is Dr. Patricia Holbrook from Mercy General Hospital. I'm afraid I have some concerning news about your recent blood work." My hands stilled on the watering can. After months of perfect health, this call felt like cosmic timing. "What kind of concerning news, doctor?" "We've found some irregularities that require immediate attention. I'd like you to come in this afternoon for additional testing. There's a possibility we're looking at a serious condition that needs aggressive treatment." I set down the watering can and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the garden your mother had designed 20 years ago. The roses were blooming magnificently, just like they did every year around the anniversary of her death. "How serious are we talking, doctor?" "I'd prefer to discuss the details in person, Mr. Carver, but I will say this: time is going to be a critical factor in whatever treatment options we pursue." After I hung up, I sat in my favorite chair and considered the implications. If this diagnosis was as serious as Dr. Holbrook's tone suggested, Emma was about to get her wish much sooner than expected. The irony was perfect. She'd spent months circling like a vulture, and now the universe was actually calling her bluff. I called Marcus Webb immediately. "Richard, how are you feeling? You sound different." "I may not have as much time as we thought, Marcus. Can you make sure everything is absolutely finalized, every detail locked in place?" "Of course. Everything is exactly as we discussed. The will is ironclad, the trusts are established, and all the conditions are clearly outlined. Emma won't be able to challenge any of it, legally or practically." "Good. And you remember the specific instructions for the reading?" Marcus chuckled. "How could I forget? You want her to believe she's inheriting the full $5 million right up until the moment she discovers the truth. It's going to be quite a performance." "She deserves a performance, Marcus. She's been giving me one for months." The diagnosis was pancreatic cancer, stage 3, aggressive and unforgiving. Dr. Holbrook gave me 6 to 8 months with treatment, maybe 4 without it. I chose treatment, not because I was afraid to die, but because I wanted to live long enough to see Emma's face when she finally understood what her greed had cost her. I didn't call her immediately. Instead, I let the news settle in my bones like winter cold, feeling the weight of mortality in a way I hadn't since your mother's final days. But unlike your mother's death, which had felt like a cruel theft, this felt almost like a gift, a chance to orchestrate one final lesson for the daughter who'd forgotten how to love her father. When I finally did call Emma 3 weeks after the diagnosis, her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. "Dad? Oh my God, I've been thinking about you so much lately. Derek and I were just saying we should visit soon." Of course they were. "Emma, I need to tell you something. I've been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear her brain spinning, calculating timelines and probabilities. "Dad, no. Oh no, how bad is it?" "Pretty bad, sweetheart. The doctors are giving me maybe 6 months, possibly less." Her intake of breath was sharp, dramatic. "We're coming over right now. Don't do anything. Don't make any decisions without us there." "Don't make any decisions," like I was some addled old fool who might accidentally give away their inheritance to the mailman. "That's not necessary, Emma. I'm handling everything fine." "No, Dad, you're not handling anything alone anymore. We're family, and family sticks together during times like this." Family sticks together. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They arrived within an hour, Emma clutching a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than she could afford, Derek carrying a fruit basket like he was visiting a business associate. But what struck me most was the change in their demeanor. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by a kind of focused intensity that made my skin crawl. They thought they were in the home stretch now. "Dad, we're so sorry," Emma said, throwing her arms around me in a hug that felt more like a claim staking than genuine affection. "But we're going to take care of everything. You don't need to worry about anything." Derek nodded solemnly. "Mr. Carver, we want you to focus entirely on your treatment. Let us handle all the practical matters, legal affairs, financial arrangements, whatever needs organizing." There it was, not even an hour after learning about my diagnosis, and they were already volunteering to manage my money. That's very thoughtful," I said, "but I've already handled most of the practical matters. My will is updated. My affairs are in order." Emma's grip on my arm tightened. "But Dad, things might need to change as your situation evolves. We should probably review everything together. Make sure it all makes sense." Make sure it all makes sense. Translation: make sure we're getting what we think we deserve. "Actually, there is one thing you could help me with," I said, watching their faces light up with anticipation. "I'd like to spend some quality time together. Real time, not just visits where we talk about practical matters." Their expressions faltered slightly. Quality time wasn't what they'd had in mind. "Of course, Dad, whatever you want," Emma said, though her smile looked painted on. "What kind of quality time?" "I'd like to take a trip. Maybe that cabin in Colorado your mother loved so much. We could spend a week there, just talking and enjoying each other's company." Derek shifted uncomfortably. "A week? That's a lot of time away from work. And with your condition, should you really be traveling?" "My condition is terminal, Derek. I think a few days with my family takes priority over your work schedule." Emma shot Derek a warning look. "What Derek means is we want to make sure you're comfortable and safe, but if you want to go to the cabin, we'll make it work." We spent 5 days at the cabin, and it was the most educational experience of my life. Not because I learned anything new about Emma and Derek, I already knew exactly who they were, but because I got to watch them perform their caring family member routine for 120 consecutive hours. Emma brought me coffee every morning, fluffed my pillows, asked about my pain levels with the dedication of a hospice nurse. Derek offered to help with everything from loading the dishwasher to chopping firewood, activities he'd never shown interest in during the 20 years I'd owned that cabin. But the real show happened during our evening conversations by the fireplace. That's when they'd steer the discussion toward my legacy, my wishes for the family, my thoughts about the future. They were conducting exit interviews with their dying cash cow, and they thought they were being subtle about it. "Dad," Emma said on our third night, curled up on the couch with a mug of hot chocolate, "I want you to know that Derek and I have been talking about ways to honor your memory. We want to make sure everything you've built continues to have meaning." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What kinds of ideas do you have?" Well, we thought maybe we could establish a scholarship in your name, or maybe support some of the charities you care about. We want to use the resources you've given us to make a positive impact." "The resources I've given you, not the resources I might give you, or the resources I'm considering giving you." She'd already decided the $5 million belonged to her. Derek leaned forward in his chair, the firelight flickering across his face. "The important thing is making sure we understand your vision, Mr. Carver. your values, your priorities. We want to be good stewards of everything you've worked for. Good stewards, like they were applying for a job managing my legacy. You know what I value most? I asked, staring into the flames. Authenticity. People being genuine about their motivations instead of pretending to be something they're not. Emma's hand tightened around her mug. What do you mean, Dad? I mean that honesty is the foundation of every meaningful relationship. When people aren't honest with each other, especially family members, it poisons everything. Derek's jaw tensed. Are you suggesting we're not being honest with you? I turned to look at him directly. I'm suggesting that everyone in this room knows exactly why we're having these conversations, and it has very little to do with honoring my memory. The silence that followed was thick with accusation and guilt. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but not the genuine kind. These were strategic tears, designed to make me feel bad for questioning their motives. Dad, how can you say that? We love you. We want to spend time with you while we still can. Do you, Emma? Do you really? Because I've been dying slowly for the past 5 years since your mother passed, and this is the first time you've wanted to spend a week with me. Derek stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We're here, aren't we? We dropped everything to support you through this diagnosis. You dropped everything to position yourselves for my death, I said quietly. There's a difference. Emma was crying harder now, but I could see the calculation behind her tears. She was weighing her options, trying to figure out how to salvage a conversation that was spiraling away from her control. Dad, please. I know I haven't been the perfect daughter, but I'm trying now. Doesn't that count for something? Trying now, I repeated, after learning I have 6 months to live. What an interesting coincidence. The rest of our time at the cabin passed in polite tension. Emma and Derek continued their performance, but the mask had slipped enough that we all knew what we were really doing there. They were auditioning for their inheritance, and I was taking notes for the final exam they didn't know was coming. When we returned home, they insisted on staying close. Emma took a leave of absence from work, the first time in her adult life she'd prioritized family over career. Derek suddenly discovered a flexible work schedule that allowed him to check on me daily. They brought groceries, cleaned my house, organized my medications, and asked detailed questions about my estate planning with the persistence of insurance adjusters. The performance continued for 3 months, right up until the morning I collapsed in my kitchen and had to be rushed to the hospital. That's when their masks finally came off completely. I was unconscious for 2 days, and when I woke up, I found Emma and Derek camped out in my hospital room like they were guarding Fort Knox. But they weren't guarding me. They were guarding their investment. Dad, thank God, Emma said when she saw my eyes open. We were so scared we might lose you. Lose me or lose their payday? Dr. Holbrook appeared within minutes, her expression grave but professional. Mr. Carver, I'm afraid we need to discuss some changes in your condition. The cancer has progressed more rapidly than we anticipated. Emma gripped my hand so tight it hurt. What does that mean? It means we're looking at weeks rather than months. I'm sorry. The silence in that hospital room was profound, but it wasn't the silence of grief or shock. It was the silence of people recalculating their timelines, adjusting their expectations, preparing for the final act of a play they'd been rehearsing for months. Dad, Emma whispered, leaning close to my ear. Is there anything you need to take care of? Any loose ends you want to tie up? Loose ends. Such a delicate way of asking if my will was finalized. Actually, I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube, there is one thing. I want to make sure Marcus Webb has everything he needs for the estate settlement. Could you call him tomorrow? Emma's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Of course, Dad, whatever you need. What I needed was for her to take the bait, and she did, beautifully. I died on a Thursday morning in October, with Emma holding one hand and Derek holding the other. Their grief seemed genuine in those final moments, and for just a second, I wondered if I'd misjudged them. Maybe they really did love me underneath all the calculation and performance. But then I heard Derek whisper to Emma as my heart monitor flatlined, It's over. We can finally move forward with our lives built on my death. Marcus Webb called Emma the next day to schedule the reading of the will. She could barely contain her excitement, asking if she needed to bring anything, if there were any forms to sign, if the process would take long. Just bring yourself, Emma, Marcus told her. Everything else is already prepared. And it was. Every detail of her education had been carefully crafted and legally sealed. Emma thought she was walking into a simple inheritance ceremony. Instead, she was about to discover the true cost of treating your father like a business opportunity. The morning of the reading, Emma dressed like she was attending a board meeting. Designer suit, expensive jewelry, the confident posture of someone about to claim their fortune. She arrived at Marcus Webb's office 15 minutes early, clutching a leather portfolio that probably contained financial planning documents for her windfall. Marcus greeted her with professional warmth and led her to his conference room, where my will waited in a sealed envelope on the polished mahogany table. Emma sat down across from it like she was facing her future, which in a way she was. "Before we begin," Marcus said, settling into his chair, "I want you to know that your father spent considerable time crafting this document. Every word was chosen deliberately, every provision carefully considered." Emma nodded eagerly. "Dad was always thorough about everything. I'm sure he's taken care of all the details." "Oh, he has," Marcus said, his smile mysterious. "He's definitely taken care of all the details." He opened the envelope with ceremonial precision, unfolding the document that would change Emma's life forever. But not in the way she expected. "The last will and testament of Richard James Carver," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "To my daughter Emma Catherine Carver Fletcher, I leave this message and the inheritance you have truly earned." Emma leaned forward, her breathing shallow with anticipation. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for, planning for, performing for over the past year. Marcus looked up at her one final time, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready, Emma?" She nodded, unable to speak. And that's when Marcus smiled. The kind of smile that comes right before everything you thought you knew about your life crumbles into dust. Emma," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years in estate law, "your father wanted me to read this section to you personally. He felt it was important that you hear every word." He cleared his throat and began reading from the document, each word falling into the silence like stones into still water. Teach Shove. "To my daughter Emma, who has shown me exactly who she is during these final months of my life, I leave you the following inheritance, calculated with the same precision you used to evaluate my net worth." Emma's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. After all, this was just Dad being dramatic. The money was coming. It had to be. Marcus continued, his tone remaining professionally neutral, despite the bombshell he was about to deliver. "First, to acknowledge your sudden interest in my health and well-being after my cancer diagnosis, I bequeath to you the sum of $1 for each genuine visit you made to see me in the 5 years following your mother's death." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She sat back in her chair, her face going pale. "I'm sorry. What does that mean?" Marcus consulted the document carefully. "According to your father's detailed records, you visited him exactly 12 times in 5 years prior to his diagnosis. Therefore, you inherit $12. $12? Emma's voice came out as a strangled whisper. "That can't be right. There has to be more. The real estate, the investments, the $5 million he told us about." "Oh, there's definitely more," Marcus said, turning to the next page. "Your father was very thorough in his calculations. For each time you called him without needing money, advice, or assistance during those same 5 years, he's left you an additional $5. Emma's hands began to shake. "How many calls was that?" Marcus adjusted his glasses, reading directly from the document. "According to phone records your father meticulously kept, you called him without asking for anything exactly 3 times. That adds $15 to your inheritance." $15, Emma repeated, her voice hollow. "You're telling me I'm inheriting $27 from a $5 million estate?" "Actually, we're not finished yet," Marcus said, his professional demeanor never wavering. "Your father also wanted to reward your performance during his final months. For each week you visited him after his diagnosis, believing you were securing your inheritance, he's left you an additional $10. Emma was struggling to breathe now, her designer suit suddenly feeling too tight around her chest. "How many weeks was that?" 16 weeks from diagnosis until death. That's an additional $160, bringing your total inheritance to $187. The silence in Marcus's office was deafening. Through the tall windows, Emma could hear the distant sounds of downtown traffic, people going about their normal lives while hers crumbled around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. "But the $5 million, she managed to whisper. "The real estate portfolio, the investments, the business proceeds. Where is all of that going?" Marcus smiled then, the kind of expression that suggested he'd been waiting for this exact question. I'm so glad you asked, Emma. Your father was very specific about the disposition of his remaining assets. He turned to the next section of the will, his voice taking on an almost ceremonial quality. To the St. Mary's Literacy Center, where I volunteered during my final year, teaching adults to read without expecting anything in return, I leave the sum of $1 million. Emma's mouth fell open, but Marcus wasn't finished. To the American Cancer Society, in memory of my beloved wife Margaret, I leave the sum of $1 million. To Doctors Without Borders, because true service means helping people who can never repay you, I leave the sum of $1 million. Each bequest hit Emma like a separate punch to the gut. She watched helplessly as millions of dollars, her millions of dollars, disappeared into the hands of strangers and charitable organizations. To my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who checked on me every day without being asked and brought me homemade soup when I was ill, never knowing about my wealth and never expecting anything in return, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my sincere gratitude for showing me what genuine kindness looks like. Emma found her voice, though it came out cracked and desperate. This isn't legal. He can't just give away everything to charity. I'm his only child. There are laws about inheritance, about family obligations. Marcus set down the will and looked at her with the patient expression of someone who'd handled dozens of similar situations. Emma, your father was of completely sound mind when he executed this document. It was witnessed by 3 independent parties and reviewed by 2 separate legal experts. Every donation is perfectly legal and thoroughly documented. But it's not fair, Emma said, tears streaming down her face now. Real tears, not the calculated ones she'd used to manipulate her father. I'm his daughter. I should inherit something meaningful. You are inheriting something meaningful, Marcus replied gently. You're inheriting exactly what your relationship with your father was worth. $187 represents the precise value of the love and respect you showed him during the last 5 years of his life. Emma slumped forward in her chair, her head in her hands. The leather portfolio she'd brought, full of financial planning documents for her expected windfall, sat unopened on the table like a monument to her delusions. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Your father wanted me to read you a personal message. Emma looked up through her tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. A personal message? Marcus pulled out a separate envelope, sealed with red wax and marked, "For Emma's eyes only." He broke the seal with ceremonial care and unfolded a handwritten letter in her father's familiar script. My dear Emma, Marcus read aloud, if you're hearing this, it means you're sitting in Marcus Webb's office expecting to inherit $5 million. By now, you've learned that your actual inheritance is $187. I imagine you're feeling shocked, betrayed, perhaps even angry. Good. Those feelings are exactly what I felt watching you transform from my beloved daughter into someone who saw me as nothing more than a retirement plan. Emma was sobbing openly now, her professional composure completely shattered. But Marcus continued reading, his voice steady and clear. You spent the last year of my life performing the role of a caring daughter while secretly calculating the value of my death. You brought me pot roast not because you wanted to spend time with me, but because you wanted to stay in my good graces until I died and left you rich. You held my hand in the hospital not from love, but from fear that I might change my will and cut you out of your expected fortune. The words echoed in the quiet office like accusations from beyond the grave. Emma tried to speak, to defend herself, but no words came. I want you to understand something, Emma. The money you thought you deserved was never really yours. It was mine, to give or keep, mine to donate or distribute, mine to use as I saw fit, and I chose to give it to people and organizations that understand the difference between genuine service and calculated performance. Marcus paused, allowing the weight of Richard's words to settle over the room. Through the windows, afternoon sunlight slanted across the conference table, illuminating the will that had just destroyed Emma's carefully constructed future. But this letter isn't just about money, sweetheart. It's about the person you've become and the person you could still choose to be. You have a choice now, Emma. You can spend the rest of your life bitter about what you didn't inherit, or you can use this moment to remember what really matters. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup further. What really matters, she whispered. What does he think really matters? Marcus continued reading. What matters is love without conditions, respect without calculation, and kindness without expectation of reward. These are the things your mother tried to teach you, the values we hoped you'd carry into your adult life. Instead, you learned to see relationships as transactions and family as a source of income. The accusations stung because they were true. Emma sat there listening to her father's voice from beyond the grave, forced to confront the person she'd become over the past year. The woman who'd measured her father's worth in dollars and cents while he was dying of cancer. The $187 I'm leaving you represents something more valuable than $5 million, Emma. It represents the exact mathematical truth of our relationship. No more, no less. You visited me 12 times in 5 years. You called me 3 times without wanting something. You spent 16 weeks pretending to care about my well-being while actually caring about my bank account. Marcus looked up from the letter, studying Emma's devastated expression. There's one final section, Emma. Are you ready to hear it? She nodded weakly, unable to trust her voice. I'm not writing this letter to be cruel, sweetheart. I'm writing it because I love you enough to tell you the truth, even if that truth is painful. You still have time to become the woman your mother and I raised you to be. You still have time to learn what real love looks like, what genuine relationships require, what authentic family means. Emma's sobs had quieted to soft hiccups. She stared at the mahogany table, seeing her reflection in its polished surface like a mirror, showing her exactly who she'd become. The money is gone, Emma. But the lesson remains. Use it wisely. Use it to remember that people are more important than possessions, that love is more valuable than inheritance, and that the relationships you build while people are alive matter more than the assets you expect to receive when they die. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. That's the end of your father's message, Emma. The silence that followed was profound. Emma sat motionless in her chair, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. A year of careful planning, of strategic visits and calculated kindness had resulted in an inheritance that wouldn't cover her parking fees for the month. What about Derek? She finally asked, her voice barely audible. Does he get anything? Marcus consulted the will again. Your father left Derek a separate bequest. For being the catalyst who helped reveal Emma's true priorities, Derek receives exactly what he contributed to the relationship with his father-in-law. Nothing. Emma almost laughed at the bitter irony. Derek, who'd pushed her to be more aggressive about securing their inheritance, who'd calculated the timeline of her father's death with businesslike precision, would receive exactly what his efforts deserved. There is one more thing, Marcus said, his voice taking on a different tone. Your father established a provision that could potentially change your inheritance, but only under very specific circumstances. Emma looked up sharply, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in a storm. What kind of provision? Marcus pulled out another document, this one sealed with blue wax. He created what he called the Redemption Trust. If you can demonstrate genuine change in your character and priorities over the next 5 years, if you can show that you've learned the lessons he tried to teach you, then you become eligible for a different inheritance. What kind of different inheritance? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. The Redemption Trust contains $50,000, Emma. Not $5 million, but enough to acknowledge real personal growth and authentic change. Emma stared at the sealed document like it was a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. What do I have to do? What kind of demonstration does he want? Marcus smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd shown since beginning the reading. The requirements are quite specific. You have to volunteer at a charity for at least 10 hours per week for 5 consecutive years, with no compensation and no recognition. You have to rebuild a genuine relationship with at least 3 family members who aren't financially beneficial to you. And you have to go 1 full year without asking anyone for money, loans, or financial assistance. The requirements hit Emma like a blueprint for becoming a completely different person. The woman who'd spent the last year treating her dying father like an investment opportunity would have to transform into someone who served others without expecting anything in return. 5 years, she repeated, 10 hours a week of volunteer work, no pay, no recognition. Your father was very specific about the terms, Marcus continued. The volunteer work has to be at organizations that serve people who can never repay you. Homeless shelters, literacy programs, food banks, places where you'd be helping people who have nothing to give you in return. Emma closed her eyes, imagining herself working in a soup kitchen or teaching adults to read. Activities that would generate no income, no social media recognition, no networking opportunities. Just pure service for the sake of helping others. And if I meet all the requirements? Then, on the 5th anniversary of your father's death, you'll receive $50,000 and a letter he wrote specifically for that occasion. A letter he'll only send if you've truly changed. Emma stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. The woman who'd entered Marcus Webb's office expecting to claim a fortune was leaving with less than $200 and a chance to earn back a tiny fraction of what she'd lost through 5 years of genuine personal transformation. "Can I see him?" she asked suddenly. "Can I visit his grave?" Marcus nodded. "Of course. He's buried next to your mother at Riverside Cemetery, plot 247 near the old oak tree." Emma gathered her purse and the check for $187 that Marcus had prepared. At the door, she turned back one final time. "Marcus, do you think he ever really loved me? After everything I did, everything I became, do you think he still loved me?" Marcus looked at her with the compassion of someone who'd spent decades helping families navigate their most difficult moments. "Emma, your father spent months crafting this will. Every provision, every condition, every word of that letter was designed to teach you something important about yourself. A man doesn't invest that much effort in someone's education unless he believes they're worth saving." Emma nodded, tears starting again. "The redemption trust. Do you think I can do it? Do you think I can become the person he wanted me to be?" "I think," Marcus said gently, "that's entirely up to you." As Emma walked out of the law office into the bright afternoon sunshine, she clutched that check for $187 like it was the most valuable thing she'd ever owned. Because in a way, it was. It was the exact mathematical representation of who she'd become and the starting point for who she might yet choose to be. Behind her, Marcus Webb was already preparing the redemption trust documents, hoping that in 5 years he'd have the privilege of delivering Richard Carver's final letter to a daughter who'd finally learned what love actually means. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning.